Some months later, when I had finally shaken off the effects of the illness, I realized it was time to get towards making a decision again. My time at the monastery had taught me that it was okay to be different than most people. My time in the wilderness had taught me that as beautiful as nature was, and as much as I still loved it, I didn't want to be completely isolated from other human beings. And of course, I had the threads of my digital business to pick up and resume if I wanted to have some sort of connection with society. I needed, of course, to make a living. It brought me back to that same old question, how to reconcile those two, my love of the digital and the natural. That's when I got the idea to build a cabin in the woods.
That was very unique, and I never met a person like that at that age in Poland. And I still don't know any person, really, apart from my husband, who built his own home without, hiring a bunch of people, being in debt. He's very unique because of his skills and his stubbornness.
I didn't have any previous building experience. I sunk all my life savings that I'd gathered from running my photo and video business for years at this point into developing some natural forested land into a little cabin homestead getaway. My plan was to build it nice but primitive, close enough to my family and to community that I wouldn't be completely cut off from everything and everyone.
So when Robert came up with the idea of building a cabin in the woods, I didn't need any convincing. I thought this is a great idea. Once again, because probably it was going to be more of a challenge for Robert than he thought.
Building was a heck of a lot harder than I thought it would be.
He didn't really know anything about building at the time, and I didn't know fully what kind of benefits it would offer Robert. I just had a sense, meeting a physical head-on challenge like that, that's always worth doing.
By nature, I'm a perfectionist. I like things to fall into place just so, and when I'm not able to make them do that, it really bothers me.
But it did pull Robert out of his natural tendency for perfectionism, and not painlessly, I might add.
And the reality of building, as anyone with any DIY and building experience knows, is that it's kind of a rough and tumble, run and gun sort of thing, and plans rarely work out exactly the way you imagined. That aspect of it drove me crazy, and the work was really physically difficult too. But I struggled through.
So on the one hand, Robert going out and building a cabin in the forest seemed very natural, partly because this was in keeping with what I'd seen of his personality for the past few years before that, and partly because this is in some ways very similar to what our own dad did. He decided to move 7 hours up north here to Manitoulin Island, build a house in the middle of nowhere where he knew absolutely no one. So it almost seemed like maybe it's just in our genetics or like our family code that we have to go do these extreme things.
Decades earlier, he had built his own house out of traditionally hand-chiseled stone from the basement to the 30-foot peak, and he knew everything about building. I was really blessed to have a dad like him because as soon as he heard that I had an interest in building this cabin, he helped me in every way he could. He taught me traditional stone masonry of the same sort he had used on his house, and I ended up using that to shape and chisel stone blocks into foundation pillars for the cabin. He taught me how to frame the floor and frame the walls, and he taught me patience, because one thing I learned is that nothing happens as fast as you want when you're doing a solo building project. Probably the most important thing my dad taught me about building, though, was to have an aesthetic sense, to appreciate beauty in architecture. And even though the cabin I was building was pretty simple by architectural standards, it was important to me to not make it ugly. And that meant to give it a classic look in every way I could. A steep 12-12 pitch roof, visible roof boards instead of plywood sheathing because I felt boards just looked better, cedar shingle siding around the outside instead of vinyl siding, even though vinyl was a lot cheaper and faster, windows with divided lights to look more like an old-fashioned cottage. Dad was just a wealth of knowledge, and of help too when I got to a stage in the project where I needed an extra set of hands. But still, like I said, everything was a heck of a lot harder than I thought. And there were many times I came really close to quitting. One time in particular, I remember I had just framed my first wall. I had made openings where the windows would go, and I was really proud of it, nailing together those studs lying down with top plates and bottom plates and these window openings. And I was just about to tip this new wall from horizontal on the floor frame to vertical and then nail it down into its final position when my dad came over to my building site for a visit and to see how I was doing. I still remember the look he got on his face when he saw my window openings.
In practice, when you get right down to the nitty-gritty of imposing a cabin on a wilderness site, or any building site for that matter, you're dealing with all kinds of compromises, and you never actually get to perfection. This was pretty hard for Robert at first.
He knew the dimension of windows I had ordered for those openings, and he immediately noticed something that I had completely missed. See, window openings in a frame of a building have to be somewhat bigger than the actual window itself, as you can imagine, because the window has to be able to fit inside that opening in the frame. I had made my frame openings the exact same size as the window. The windows had already been ordered, they were coming, the rough frame openings were just too small. And because everything was already nailed together by way too many nails, since I didn't really know what I was doing, there was no salvaging that wall frame. All I could do was cut it up with a chainsaw and drive it away on the farm wagon to go to the burning pile. The flame of cabin building desire was almost completely extinguished at that point, and I didn't think I could go on. It was too hard. There were too many things to think about, trying to think ahead and plan and design and envision in my head what I was building when all I had were a few sticks of lumber to make it happen. It just made my head spin, and I almost walked away from it. But I couldn't, because I knew that what waited for me if I quit was the same sort of life everyone else had. Those friends of mine who had gone to university, gotten a degree in fine arts or psychology, still hadn't found a job in their field, a field they didn't even want to work in half the time anyway, by the way. I knew I didn't want that. I knew that even though the path in front of me was proving extremely difficult, that I had to keep going if I wanted to avoid a life of quiet desperation, if I wanted to truly live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life, as Thoreau said. So I kept going.
I can remember so many dinner time conversations that basically consisted of Robert agonizing over some sort of mistake that he'd made in the building of his cabin, or in some sort of choice that he had to make regarding the building of his cabin, and my dad trying to kind of like talk him down. Like, it's okay, mistakes happen, imperfection is okay. And this was just extremely irritating to me because I had absolutely no interest in any of this and couldn't really understand it.
After a couple of years of hard work and beating my head against the wall, literally and figuratively, the cabin was pretty much finished. It was 20 by 16 feet and it had a nice little loft up top, and I was extremely proud of it. That's when I started to think, wouldn't it be nice to have someone to share this with?